there are research studies as well that showcase that AI-generated content now being trained on synthetic data, it's going to be even more difficult to actually detect what is AI and what's not. So we see a future where that's potentially the case, where bad actors could have access to even more sophisticated ways of generating content.
So from the perspective of an engineer, do you guys dislike policies or regulation? Does it stifle creativity?
No, we don't dislike policies. I don't think it stifles innovation in a way. How I see it is, I don't really see policies as restrictions. I see them more as guidelines for us developers to keep it in mind as we develop.
The research has definitely showed that there is no reason to not prioritize responsible AI.
Hey everybody. So as the saying goes, the more the merrier. On today's episode, I have two guests, Lusine and Trung, and I'm super excited for a couple of reasons. The first is that I have literally like two sides of the coin, an AI governance and policy researcher as well as an AI engineer, and this has always been like my dream to actually interview both of them together in one space to see how, just to get into their heads a little bit. And so with that, I would like to introduce Lusine and Trung. Lusine is an AI governance researcher at the National Fair Housing Alliance, and Trung is an associate software engineer at the same company, National Fair Housing Alliance. Hi Lusine, hi Trung, how are you both doing?
Hi, we're doing pretty well. Excited to chat with you today. I know that you've set out a great discussion for us, and we're excited to kind of contribute to this conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, same here. Also looking forward to being part of this conversation.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question for both of you, and anyone can chime in here. So in terms of, one thing that will be important in developing or promoting responsible AI is having both sides work together, the AI engineers as well as the AI policy and governance experts. So I know you both worked on Textrify, which is an AI tool for basically differentiating between human and AI text. So let's start with that. How was it working on that tool for the both of you? How was it?
Yeah, sure. I can kick us off. So I think, first of all, it was one of my favorite projects to collaborate with the team. Trung has been leading this project as part of the NIST challenge, which I'm sure he'll comment on more. But I think as a policy and governance researcher coming in to kind of understand what the tool was developed, were the core architecture and key components of Textrify, and kind of more broadly think about the policy implications of that technology, required kind of understanding and thorough descriptions that Trung provided. So such as how was the model developed, what data was it trained on, to kind of ignite those policy components. And there were a few moments where maybe there was a misunderstanding in what actually the product was. So we met up again to kind of understand the scope. But I think it was a great exercise to kind of see the challenges that can emerge when technical leads and policy leads are trying to collaborate, because they come into the problem with maybe different frameworks or different levels of understanding what the solution is at stake. And being able to speak each other's language and come up with examples that the other party can understand is incredibly important, and kind of those mental processes to align on the same problem or same goal that you're trying to accomplish. So I found it to be incredibly helpful to collaborate with Trung. He's a great communicator, which helped. Brought up some examples to showcase in the process. But it definitely shows that interdisciplinary action does require clear communication and kind of understanding what the other party is working with and what their base knowledge is.
Awesome. How about you, Trung?
Yeah, for me, I guess as a developer, this was a very fun project that I get to work on, especially since this project was the first time I get to actually learn to train my own models. And that was, it was very exciting. And, like Lusine mentioned, clear communication is very necessary when it comes to collaborating with both of us because, if the researchers were to, define clear criteria and requirements, then the developers can use that to develop the tool much easily. But other than that, the application, the project was very fun to work with. So and it was very fun to collaborate with Lusine on that as well.
So how was it for you translating the policies into concrete code? Was it challenging or was it easy?
I wouldn't say it's challenging necessarily, just because Lusine is around to help break down these policies whenever something's unclear to me, and also I wouldn't say like it's very challenging just because there's not really much. I mean, for me at least, translating these things into code is all about bridging the gaps between high-level guidance and the practical implementations. And to do that, the first step is to thoroughly understand the requirements, the criteria for such policies and principles. So there's not really much challenge to do so, really, in my opinion, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay, so with tools like Textrify to promote fairness and transparency in AI content, do you believe this would, in a broader landscape, help promote, safe, secure, responsible AI where we have transparency, especially with things like deep fakes coming up?
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. I can kick us off with that particular question. So, as you mentioned, deepfakes, misinformation, disinformation, those are the key areas where AI detection tools around synthetic data, synthetic content are incredibly important. And I think tools like Textrify are our first kind of effort in trying to understand what is authentic. And that notion of authenticity obviously is fluid. Currently, we see authenticity around human-generated content, and we know that there's a lot of issues with a lot of these foundational models, whether it's GPTs or multi-models that are leveraging a lot of content, and there's issues of potentially IP and copyright. But detection tools are kind of that first effort in governance and visibility to try to understand what is so-called authentic, what is human-generated, and what might be augmented or completely AI-generated. And the reason it's important is because with the magnitude of content that is now available online, we need some way of understanding data provenance standards and visibility into who the authors or the owners of our content in order to establish accountability, not just transparency. And this is incredibly important in the cases where content could be harmful, could be in high-stake environments such as housing or other decision-making sectors where opportunities and access to resources could be determined by a piece of content or influenced by a piece of content. So I think tools like this are quite experimental in the current stage. There's both limitations in detection availabilities and a robustness being built. But essentially, we're trying to understand the landscape of content online, what is human generated, what is AI augmented or completely AI generated, so then we can not just establish transparency but also accountability measures in cases where there is a potential negative impact.
Would this be a cat and dog race? I mean, in terms of the let's say the bad actors using this AI, and then the engineers like Trung trying to decipher if this is AI or if this is human or good or bad. Do you think it's going to keep being a dog and cat race, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Trung and I have had some philosophical questions about this as well. Right now, detection tools are showing a lot of promise, and we know the use cases where they could be incredibly valuable for establishing accountability. But like you said, I think the content is going to become increasingly more sophisticated, and there are research studies as well that showcase that AI-generated content now being trained on synthetic data, it's going to be even more difficult to actually detect what is AI and what's not. So we see a future where that's potentially the case, where bad actors could have access to even more sophisticated ways of generating content. But yes, so I always think research has to be involved in understanding what are the frontiers of potential misuse, and plan ahead with not just detection tools, but kind of understanding what other vulnerabilities could be in place of the technologies that we're building. But yeah, I think it's still important to take the initiative to understand what, with detection software, what are the applicable use cases of this technology and what are the potential misuses, right? So I think that's what you're seeing, a lot of focus on synthetic data, and bills both on a state and federal level being introduced for deepfakes, and particularly use of synthetic content in high stakes such as political campaigns, because we know that the impacts of that use case are going to be quite harmful if they are mistreated or exploited.
So, Trung, how challenging was it creating Textrify, knowing that, two AI models like GPTs and the rest are sophisticated? So how were you able to figure this out in terms of ensuring the accuracy of the model you created?
Yeah, it was very challenging indeed. Like Lusine mentioned, AI is practically everywhere now. And so when it comes to the biggest challenge in this development of this tool is mainly just, trying to train the models with both human-generated data and AI-generated data. AI-generated data is relatively easy to get. Simply just go with ChatGPT or Cloud or pretty much any other AI platforms and ask them to generate some data for you. And whereas for human-generated content, at first it was very difficult to figure that out, but then, I figured Wikipedia does have archives of old pages, so that's what I primarily used for the human side of the data to train my models on. So for that, I mainly focus on Wikipedia pages that are like around 2010. So that's pretty much how I was able to solve that issue. But again, like Lusine mentioned, AI-generated contents are pretty much everywhere now. It's going to become very increasingly difficult to solve. Even if the model is achieving high accuracy now, in the future, it's going to become much more challenging. And just for a brief example, I'm going to reference the NIST challenge on this. So NIST challenge does have another side to this called the generated side. And their task is to develop models that could generate contents that are indistinguishable to humans. And so pretty much they did release phase 2 data set with the results from the generated team, and I did try out my models on that, and the accuracy did drop. So that pretty much tells us what's going to happen in the future as these AI technologies become more sophisticated, and that the accuracy will drop. And pretty much it's very difficult to ensure accuracy at this point because it's just going to keep getting better and better in the future.
So what do you think is the solution? Or are we stuck with this?
I have no idea, to be honest. I think, I have no idea. Because, to be honest, it's becoming very good at mimicking human writing. So, at the moment, I have no idea what the solution could be at the moment. So, yeah.
I guess that's where Lusine comes in because she's AI governance researcher, so I believe she'll be able to come up with something eventually. Right?
Yeah, it's still a difficult challenge because, again, the purpose of detection tools is to not just have more understanding and transparency around where content originates from and to establish that accountability through authorship, right? So even if someone is using AI generated content, if they have utilized their own authorship on that content, we still have to kind of think about liability in that case if there's potential harms coming from specific content. But I think in a grand scheme of things, it's very important to kind of understand synthetic content and its impact on this, loss of trust and just kind of existing in our current society, whether it's in political context or in other forms of just, looking at housing listings, right? You could be looking at content that was completely AI generated, and maybe currently it's not doing the best job, but in the future it would be. So I don't know if there's any way to actually advocate for that to slow down, because as we see, there's so much investment in generative AI, and there's definitely a lot of efficiency promises that are going to be, actualized. But the role of policy and regulation in this case is to make the efforts of risk management more proactive rather than reactive. So rather than looking at harms as they come into action, and the public is actually impacted, because we can investigate the harms already in some of these pilot use cases, we need policies that strengthen that effort at a proactive level before products and use cases are launched into the public, right? So we know that AI-generated content might continue to proliferate online, but we need to establish not just transparency, but accountability measures for platforms that do allow that or maybe facilitate that. And have the proper risk management protocols to test models, to test outcomes in various use cases, right? Especially with these foundational models that could be utilized in open source baseline as baseline technology to create other solutions. I think policies are going to be the most effective when they require that constant auditing and life cycle approach, such as looking at design, development, and deployment risk management techniques. And in that, there's a vast amount of different efforts to take, which some of our work is focused on AI fairness, some is focused on transparency and disclosure and protection of rights. So there's a lot of things to be covered under that umbrella, but it needs to move towards a more proactive approach in order for us to at least have more proper guardrails and minimize those potential misuses that we're bound to see if we don't have the proper governance in place.
So being more proactive, with the rapid increase in advancement in AI, so I know you mentioned that maybe there should be policies in place before the AI products come into being, but is that entirely possible? And how can the policies meet up with the pace of innovation? Or do we have to slow down innovation to ensure that the policies are at the foundation, or do we have to increase the pace of policies to meet with the innovation pace?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes there's this debate of regulation, stifling innovation. But I mean, there are real world contexts where we see, in highly regulated sectors, even in healthcare, right? In some examples of financial sector as well, there are specific policies at a federal level, at a state level that need to be followed and compliant. And we still see that harm can emerge, such as violations of the Fair Housing Act or ECOA, right? the challenge there is enforcement. So I think there is an enforcement scale problem that needs to be addressed, whether it's leveraging new technologies to be more proactive about investigating potential non-compliance issues. But also kind of looking sectorally in spaces where we have been more proactive, such as the healthcare industry. There's been a couple of reports on how we can leverage the frameworks from FDA and when we think about regulating AI as a whole. That require impact assessments, rigorous testing for fairness, and so on, before products are placed in the market. That's because the stakes of harm are so significant that we want to avoid it at all costs. And I think a similar approach could be utilized, especially in cases that are high risk, such as employment, healthcare, housing, some of the essential aspects of just welfare that do require more attention to being proactive because you're going to impact at the bottom line to people and their lives. So I think policies can learn from those sectors to leverage those frameworks that have been successful. The question of AI is accelerating at a rate that we definitely can't have policies that are so rigid that are not allowing for flexibility. So we still need that level of nuance to not get lost. And policies, I think, are, at least in the States, will be the most effective when we do an assessment of our current regulatory landscape to see what are the gaps, and then have new policies that support those existing policies, such as the Fair Housing Act or others. There are also other approaches that have been proposed, such as regulatory sandboxes, where we can allow a controlled environment for products or novel frontier products to be tested to see how the current regulatory frameworks apply or don't apply, and then that will give us insight into how we need to be meeting those gaps. But I think regulation will provide the responsible guidelines for innovation to prosper, if that makes sense. It definitely needs to be flexible and kind of adhere to how fast everything is accelerating, but it doesn't have to compromise some of those core components, such as civil rights protections, being non-discriminatory, and also ensuring equity and basic safety rights for the public.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Trung on that. So from the perspective of an engineer, do you guys dislike policies or regulation? Does it stifle creativity?
No, we don't dislike policies. I don't think it stifles innovation in a way. How I see it is, I don't really see policies as restrictions. I see them more as guidelines for our use, for us developers to keep it in mind as we develop. So, in a way, again, I don't really see these policies or restrictions or regulations as anything, just guidelines. Just so long as they provide us with clear, actionable, step-by-step requirements or criteria, then then everything's fine.
Guidelines. I love that. Guidelines. Okay, so Lusine, you have a social background, social policy background, but so I would like to know, how has that impacted your approach to AI, and why did you make the switch?
Yeah, sure. I think my social science background just at a default makes me always think about the societal context where technologies are going to operate. So when we think about assessing technologies, we have a auditing framework called the PPM framework, which essentially looks at products, or in this case, let's say an AI system, evaluating from an early stage of design or the purpose stage all the way to deployment. What are the questions, guidelines that should be incorporated in order to create a responsible product, in order to assess how ethical, essentially, your solutions are. And I think because of the social science training, you're always kind of looking at both tech, but also the use of tech, the context of the application and how it's being deployed, and its continuous use, not in an interchangeable kind of ecosystem with society. So it's not just a siloed tool, even in the process of decision making, right? When you're choosing what questions to ask, what is a fair question, how are you going to assess people if you are building a platform of that sort where you're assessing profiles or candidacy of potential applicants, what type of criteria or variables you're incorporating and why. There's a human element that touches all aspects of an AI system, from design to its development to its deployment. And not just its deployment in the context that it's now existing, but also how is it changing to new data? How is it impacting at a large scale, at a systemic level, right? So I think it's just that social training is just being aware that the products themselves are not siloed and they exist in this ecosystem with humans. And it's always trying to catch the nuances as well, where policy or maybe technological solutions might not be getting from right off the bat, because oftentimes, even in policy, we can design solutions that we think are going to be effective, but then in practice, which oftentimes is supported by field work, we see that there are some apparent limitations. So hopefully with more of a qualitative as well as quantitative approach to investigating both these technologies and policies, we can capture those nuances and just be more aware of where our shortcomings are.
Yeah. Awesome. So, in terms of bias, just the way humans are biased, the data they provide are definitely have some inherent bias in them. So, how do you de-bias the model? So, this has both a technical and policy perspective. How do you build models and ensure that you try not to carry on the human bias into the models?
Sure.
Unfortunately, I do not have that much experience of unbiasing models yet. But for example, training the models for Textrify, just to ensure there's no, I guess, inherent bias on that. I made sure just to grab text from diverse topics on Wikipedia. So I don't know if that answers the questions, but that's how I essentially try to make sure there's no inherent bias in the training data.
Great, thank you. Lusine.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of touched on this, but I'm happy to elaborate. So at a first step, we want to make sure that we're leveraging some sort of a governance framework. So it could be the NIST risk management framework or the NAFA's PPM framework that allows you to have visibility into all stages of an AI system development or the life cycle, to ask the proper questions and investigate the ethical, decision-making process, essentially. So when it comes to design, again, are you asking the right questions? Is there a potential inherent bias in the types of questions you're asking? Or if you're trying to get an answer to your questions, you have to already think about what might be the issues associated or biases inherent to the data sets that you may be collecting. At a data collection point of view, not just thinking about the data as required, but as well as consent, informed consent in this case. What are the types of data sets that could be potentially problematic for the questions you're trying to ask? You would potentially do proxy testing in this case to try to understand any correlations or dependencies of your data sets, even if you don't utilize any sensitive attributes such as race or gender. At a development stage, you're thinking about your variables, your architecture, what is going to be important for your model, and how are you weighing it in the decision-making process. In this case, it's important to kind of think about incorporating fairness constraints, incorporating any measures of mitigating biases that may emerge from your data sets, which again, could also be applied at a pre-processing stage where you're doing techniques or on your data sets to make sure that you're having a representative sample and that you don't have any imbalances that could be potentially leading to disparate impact. There's also measures you could take at a post-processing stage, so kind of on your outcomes, right? So there's levels of fairness measures and mitigation techniques that you could take at all stages of a model development. It's definitely going to potentially slow down the process of development, but it's going to ensure that you're more proactive and you've taken the ethical steps to be more responsible in your system development. Yeah, and I think it's also important to think about how we can operationalize some of these techniques at a large scale. So in the space of fair housing, we hear this term LDAs, less discriminatory alternatives. It's essentially the concept that if you have a traditional base model, if you take the proper search protocols, there should be a viable alternative that will also be more fair and have less of a disparate impact. So these less discriminatory alternatives are an emerging research space, and we had collaborated with Fairplay AI on a paper on this, utilizing distribution matching to showcase how viable and possible these tools are, and they could be implemented by industry and not just by in the lending space, but in other sectors as well. But I think more research needs to be developed in how we can operationalize the process for searching an LDA and have more proper guidelines for developers and for the tech teams to actually follow. So rather than saying, you know, we know that these techniques exist and we know that here are some of the use cases that we've developed to prove that they could be viable, we're also providing some search guidelines in order for developers and practitioners to implement and to carry out their search. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in order to scale those solutions, but the research has definitely showed that there is no reason to not prioritize responsible AI. There are various mechanisms and techniques that could be utilized. It's just a matter of prioritizing that for the developers as well.
You know, speaking with both of you just reemphasizes the importance of collaboration between AI governance researchers and AI engineers. Do you believe this should be a best practice standard across the AI industry and maybe even beyond?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think it should be a thing to happen. You know, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself because I'm not sure about other engineers, but my primary focus is often on creating and building innovative tools, and you know, as a result of that, you know, I get excited about these kinds of things, and that excitement can lead me to overlook key aspects like policy implications and requirements. You know, since you know I'm not really a policy expert, but you know that's where you know I think policy experts do play a crucial role in this by helping us understand these policies by breaking them down so that we can you know use that to guide us through our developments.
So more engineers should be open to collaborating, not working in silos, right?
Yes, exactly. Because we're too busy, because we're too focused on building something nice and innovative. So, yeah, and that again, like I said, that could make us overlook policy implications and things like that.
So when building Textrify, was there any point at which you both had maybe not disagreement, but diverse opinions, like let's say balancing technical feasibility versus compliance with policy and regulations? Was there any point, or was it just smooth? Was it a smooth sail?
I would say it was pretty smooth sailing in my opinion. Just because you know, just because from how I see it really is, you know. Like I mentioned many times before, you know, policies are meant to serve as guidance than your restrictions, and you know, as long as there's clear like criteria and requirements, it will be pretty much smooth sailing for us developers anyway. So, I mean, I don't know if Lusine wants to add anything to that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Trung, your sentiment, I'm aligning with that. I think this was also a small scale project. I think when you think about some of the bigger challenges in industry we see, such as AI fairness, right? How much effort should developers commit to in order to have a viable search for a less discriminatory alternative? There's no proper guidance on that yet from regulatory bodies, but also in general could vary from organization to organization. It could be, measured by computational power or number of days or hours allocated to that search. So I think those are some of the practical challenges in decision making when it comes for the responsible AI measures. In this case, I think a large part of our collaboration was to kind of discuss and understand the product, its architecture, and its implications, particularly for in housing and fair housing activities, the value of AI detection tools that in establishing accountability and greater transparency around content. So yeah, I think it was more collaborative and just getting Trunk's input as well on the social policy implications of a detection tool such as Textrify.
Awesome. So so I have two in one. The first question is, what would you say to people who are scared of AI? Because especially when it gets into the hand of bad actors, what would you say? That's the first question.
Wow, that's a big question. What would you say? I think we're all a little cautious and terrified of what's to come. I think I would say that with the lack of insight and control we have currently of what is being developed in a private sector, how they're being developed, what measures are being taken, because again, we don't have that comprehensive regulation currently, as well as what type of misuse cases are out there outside of the ones that we're quite aware of, right? Misinformation, deep fakes, anything that has alerted policymakers to put legislation out there, but also just in AI discourse in general. AI literacy, I think, is going to be a key tool, an enabler for the public to feel more secure in their ability to make decisions online, at least when it comes to synthetic content, just being more critical and requiring more of that assessment of everything that we see and everything that we hear as well, because it's not just text and video or images, right? We're seeing multiple emergence of generative AI. Yeah, I think we just need to educate the public. It's a continuous effort with multi-stakeholders in how this technology works, where this technology may be utilized, what are the potential threat actor misuse cases that we have seen, what to be wary of, and how to critically exist and interact with the world in a sense. So it's just alerting us through that knowledge to be more equipped to exist in this reality. Yeah, I think that's the one strong solution that is really, unfortunately, shifting the focus on building our knowledge around it. So it's the responsibility of the public to keep being informed in order to protect themselves. But it is incredibly important, especially when we don't have a lot of visibility into the risk management actions that have been taken, at least on these technologies, or and we also don't have a strong enforcement or legislation at a federal level that we can be more certain that some of those misuse cases won't proliferate. So yeah, I think just build up your AI literacy and be more critical of how you evaluate and assess things you see online. Yeah.
On the flip side, so as an engineering trunk, I've heard of this theory, I don't know how true it is, that someday AI will just become so smart and just eliminate all humans from the world. Is that true? Is that possible?
I think the direction we're heading is possible. I don't know if you've been following the news, but there's a event that Tesla hosted, I think, a couple of days ago called We Robot. And they're showcasing these robots moving around and interacting with the customers. I think we are pretty much about to head in that direction, unfortunately. But it's a very scary thought to think about. So, yeah.
So you mean like someday the robots would want to eliminate all humans? Is that the direction we're heading to? Or you mean like when the robot's pretty smart or even smarter than humans? Is that what you mean?
I mean, I think there's a risk that could happen, in my opinion.
Which could happen?
AI is taking over and possibly eliminating us kind of risk.
Okay.
Just because, I mean, this is how I see it really. These robots are designed by humans and such, there are risks like, human biases and, the way humans are, right? And, and that kind of risk would probably be ingrained into these robots' programming or intelligence. And that's why I do see a risk of these robots potentially taking over and possibly putting us into extinction probably. But that's my take on that. So.
Wow, that's a scary discovery. Okay, the second question, yes, I remember, is what are you excited about? Trends in terms of policy and Trung in terms of technologies, or generally, what are you excited about? Because we've talked about more like the other side, the negative side. So how about the positive? What are you looking forward to? What are you excited about?
I think I am. So this may sound quite I don't know the word for this, but kind of very hypocritical, considering I just say that it's scared that robots might take over. But I'm excited in the potential of AI to develop its own form of consciousness. I mean, we're already
AGI.
No, not necessarily like artificial life kind of consciousness.
Okay.
Like I'm more excited about that possibility, but we're not really there yet. But we're really seeing glimpses of this happening through the advancements in large language models. They are becoming increasingly capable of reasoning, logic, holding conversations. We even already have technology that could convert text to audio, so in a way give them voice. So we already have the foundation for both the brain and the voice itself. So, I mean, we have everything, but we're still far away from artificial consciousness. But yeah. But I know that sounds very hypocritical considering the previous conversation, saying that, it's scary to think these robots might take over, but that's, in a way, what I'm excited about, which is, yeah.
Well, don't feel it's not hypocritical. It's expected as an engineer, so yeah, it's okay. How about you, Lusine?
Yeah, two things I'm really excited about. One of them on the solution side of things, the other one on the policy. For policy, I do think we are probably at the best place that we've ever been around AI regulation and governance because of the rise of not just advocacy and awareness of how these risks are emerging, of not just on the generative AI side of things, but in domains like housing and financial sector, AI models have been utilized for decades, and we are seeing a lot more focus in governance efforts and pushing for more rigid, proactive measures. So I'm excited to see where, at least in the states, we go ahead with policies. I think at state level, we're seeing a lot of activity, and maybe that will facilitate something to be developed at a federal level that will have an impact at least on these high risk, high impact sectors such as financial services, healthcare, employment, and so on. So I'm excited for that. The second thing is with the emergence of a lot of these generative AI tools, they do have the potential to operationalize and be more efficient. in specific tasks that are administrative or maybe very tasks intensive and can be automated. And I'm excited to see if we can leverage some of those capabilities in our enforcement. Because like I said, right now we operate in this space where if there is a violation of, let's say, non-discrimination laws with the use of AI in the private sector, industry is quite open to paying that fine and maybe bearing some of those costs, with the assumption that that's better than actually slowing down the development process or being more proactive, because that's a greater risk to the company's market profitability and being able to be up to speed with what the standards are, right, for so-called innovation. So I think there's always this, with our legal system, there's this always reactionary element to protecting the public. So we wait for harms to surface and maybe there's a fine associated with that harm, but then how do we ensure that no harm, continues to happen? And that effort, I feel like, could be improved if we leverage more of these novel technologies for solutions around enforcement. So then we're not just waiting at a very maybe manual process to identify where those potential risks are, or wait for harm to arise in order to be reactionary, but we're being more proactive and we have a scaled approach into assessing what companies are being compliant, at least with existing laws, and which companies are kind of just coasting and waiting to be reactionary the second something comes up. So I'm excited for that. And there's a lot of other reasons to be excited about AI. What's most important is that we stay excited while still leveraging some of these governance principles to be ethical too.
Right. The balance.
Exactly.
How about you, Trung?
I'm just gonna repeat anyway. I'm particularly excited about the potential of AI to develop its own form of consciousness, or in general, artificial life in general is the topic that I'm more excited about. So yeah.
Yeah. So final thoughts. What are your final thoughts? I don't want you guys to go, but I know you have to. But it's so amazing discussing with you both. So what are your final thoughts?
I think my final thought is, AI is a very exciting field, and it's very exciting to see where it's heading. But at the same time, we need to be we need to have our due diligence and be more proactive on the risks that it would bring in the future. So that's my take on AI.
Awesome. Lusine?
Yeah, and final thoughts, this is not an original thought. I think it's echoed a lot by policymakers and advocates that have been trying to do this type of work prior to AI kind of taking the hot seat at a cultural level. But some of the issues that we're seeing with AI are not AI specific, they're historical issues. So essentially, it's just a reflection and another technologically transformed form of the issues that we've seen in other parts of our chapters, or human chapters. So I think it's important to realize that AI, at least the issues that we see with AI, are not new. Some of them are new because the format and the process of what AI brings is new. But at least some of the issues that we're trying to tackle here at the Responsible AI Lab are historical issues, and oftentimes AI could be used an umbrella term or something super sophisticated, but it's not. I think it's just technology nowadays. It's just like cloud. Everything is cloud. So I think we just need more individuals from impacted communities and interdisciplinary backgrounds to be part of the conversation, to make sure that policies are being shaped to protect those same individuals that have been harmed before, rather than more of a top-down approach where we don't actually understand the lived experiences. So yeah, I'm excited to be part of that challenge.
It's been an amazing discussion with you, Lusine and Trung. Thank you so much for being here, being proactive, and the need for collaboration and not reactive measures. I mean, so many things to take home from this. So, and I'm sure that the listeners or viewers definitely learned a lot. Thank you for being here, Lusine and Trung. Thank you so much. And until next episode, everyone, stay good and like, share, subscribe. Let me know your comments and your reviews. And bye-bye.